All right, it's Wednesday. I'm back with the positive effect. I'm so excited today. This conversation is a great conversation that I bring to, my audience every week, my retail audience and friends and family across the globe. And it really is to showcase and like really talk to leaders that have had a positive effect on the business that they led and lead, and the people that they've worked with. And so I really think that the effect of positive leadership can't be underestimated, and it should be celebrated, especially in retail, because we work in such an amazing industry. And today I'm so excited that I have Lloyd A. Perlmutter on the positive effect. So welcome, Lloyd.
Thanks, April. I appreciate you having me. I've been, following the whole positive effect thing and retail you, and you're doing an incredible job of something that's really sorely needed in the industry. And obviously you're finding that there's a huge need. So I'm just glad that you're the one that's going to be able to fulfill it. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. So we have 30 minutes to,
Yeah,
pick your brain and get as much information out of you as we can.
right.
If you're joining the feed, put your name in the feed, where you're coming from, because we have an amazing global retail community that's growing every week on this. And so, yeah, we're going to start off just jumping right into it, because it's not about me, it's about you today and what we can learn from you. So if you want to start off by telling us, how did you get into retail? Ron Thurston wrote a book called Retail Pie, and I always give him a plug because I love it. And he's always talking about this accidental retail career, but it's different for everybody. So we want to hear your story.
Back in the day, and I'm going to sound like an old fogey now, but back in the day, it was really that you didn't choose retail, retail chose you. And so that was really, now it's changed and retail's become such an incredible career for people. But so basically what happened was we had this summer camp that my father had bought to save it. It was called Camp Tamaqua in Northern Ontario, and some of you may be familiar with it. But they my father was a big time canoeist, and he commissioned these canoes to be built because he couldn't find ones that matched the old style canoe, cedar canvas wrapped canoe. So they created this company called Beaver Canoe, and they were just making canoes for the camp. That's all they were doing.
Wow.
And when I was up at camp helping run the camp for this after I graduated from college, they said, why don't we open a retail store that we can sell the canoes to the public and also sell some stuff for the outdoors and the wilderness. That whole trend started happening back in the 80s around outdoors and the wilderness and this, that, and the other thing. So they said, they turned to me and said, Lloyd, why don't you do this? You're not doing anything. I thought I was going to go to New York and be on Madison Avenue, to be honest. I was going to be an ad guy. That's what I really wanted to be. This was before Mad Men came out, by the way. So
I
I
love
was
it.
really, yeah. So that's what I was going to do. Anyway, so I said, sure, I'll do it for a year. And this, that. So I put together the whole thing. Like I put together had no idea what I was doing, but I put together all the knickknacks and helped put together the assortment for the apparel. And then we created a sweatshirt and t-shirt with the big logo on it. We designed a store, which was a log cabin, and we opened, of all places, in Hazleton Lanes in 1983, May of 83.
Wow.
And it was kind of a bizarre location. It was 1,200 square feet, and we had a big awning out on the front of Avenue Road in Toronto. And that drove a lot of interest. Anyway, first year we did business, we did $250,000 of business, and I made every sale. So I thought that was incredible, right?
Yeah.
It was only $200 a foot, but for first year, so we tried to figure out, okay, now it's first year, I'm finished first year. And so what do you want? I'll stick with it. We tripled the business the next year and doubled it the next, and we opened 19 stores. So that's how I got into retail. And it was not by design per se, but it was, I did interview with Bloomingdale's when they came to campus. I remember I didn't want to be an investment banker. So so I went, they flew me to New York because the guy liked me. He flew me to New York and I met with 4 Jewish grandmothers who were,
Really?
seriously, they were the merchants and or the operations people at each floor in Bloomingdale's. And of course, they loved me. And so they offered me a job. And so I always say I turned down Bloomingdale's for Beaver Canoe because, that's
Wow.
just a good story.
It's a good story.
So
That's a great story.
that's how I got into retail.
So walk us through. That's an amazing story, by the way. I love it. Like there's so many different pathways, and this is
Yes,
just such an interesting one.
right.
So what happened next? Walk us through, because you've held senior roles. I'm super impressed when I look at your LinkedIn, and when I look at the companies and organizations you've worked for. So walk us through, step by step, like how did your career evolve? How did you get inspired to continue to grow in retail in your leadership career?
So, when you're an entrepreneur, you do everything, right? And so I was very hands-on, obviously, throughout. We kind of sold Beaver Canoe in 1992. And I said, I'm done with retail. I'm finished. I'm burnt out. I've had enough. It's hard. It's difficult. It was the recession. It was all kinds of things. So I went and did some other things. And then an epiphany happened, which I've had several epiphanies over my career. Hopefully, I'll have a few more. And I love to shop stores. So I love to go in malls. I love to go in stores. So there was a new Banana Republic store that was built on Michigan Avenue. It looked like a Quonset hut, actually. And so my wife and I went in there. And, this was a year and a half after we finished with Beaver Canoe. So we came out of the store, and my wife stops me on the street in Michigan Avenue. There's hundreds of people going by. She said, "Do you realize your whole body language changes when you're in a store?" I said,
Really?
"What are you talking about?" Says, "You're happy, you're confident, you're pointing, you're in your element. Do us both a favor and get back into retail because you're miserable."
I loved it.
Okay, so you can't make this stuff up, right? So okay, so a friend of mine went to business school with Bill Fisher, who was the middle child of Don Fisher at Gap.
Okay.
And he was running Gap International, and she said, "You got to have dinner with Bill." And he was running Canada and all that. So I said, no. I'm off retail. I don't want to do this, Marion. So I called Marion up. I said, "Marion, okay, let's set up the dinner." So I went to dinner with Bill. One thing led to another, and I I got hired at Gap. There's another story about this. Everything's a story.
I
So
love it.
nothing's a straight line with me. Anyway, so Bill and I met a few times, and what I thought was I was interviewing to replace the country manager who wanted to go back. She was an expat. She wanted to go back to the United States.
Right.
And so they're looking for the first, a native country manager in all of their international division because everybody else was an expat.
Yeah.
So he said, "I'm not sure you could do this because you've only run 19 stores and we've got 50 and we're going to go to X amount." I said, "Bill, we'll agree to disagree. I can do this." So he says, "I'm going to send you down to San Francisco and you're going to meet with a zillion people. It's only the interview process at Gap. And they'll let me know where we want you in the organization. I don't know where you should fit." Okay. So I went down and I went through a gauntlet of interviews. The very first interview was a guy, and some of you might remember this name, Kevin Lonergan. Now, Kevin Lonergan was the COO of Old Navy at the time, one of the first few people that was charged with building the Old Navy brand. And God love him, he passed away in an accident a few years ago. But and he was a tough Irish son of a gun. Like he was, but he had an incredible sense of humor. Anyway, so I met with him at 7 a.m. because that's him. And so I met with. And we established a rapport like within 5-10 minutes. So he said to me, "Okay, what's the problem here? Like, what's Bill sending me? Like, what's?" I said, "Well, Bill doesn't think I can run Canada. He thinks I should do something else." He says, "Wait a minute." He picks up the phone. He calls Bill. He said, "Bill, Kevin, I'm here sitting with Lloyd. What's your problem? Like, this guy could run circles around anybody I've met in the past few years. Like, get a grip." Anyway. So one thing led to another. I trained for 3 months in New York. I then trained for 3 months in San Francisco. This is the days when they set me up in apartments and they set me up here and there. And then I had to meet with Mickey, of course, to get the blessing, and then moved back to Canada and started as country manager of Canada. And eventually we moved it from 50 stores to 250 stores, from $250 million to $1.2 billion in about 7 years. So that was incredible. But here's the thing. So you don't go from an entrepreneurial business to a business that's multinational, public, with, the functions that you only dream of as an entrepreneur.
Right.
And figuring out how to leverage all those functions. So 2 epiphanies from a leadership standpoint. So
Okay,
this is
I
how
love
I
it.
developed my leadership style and understanding and development. So I had a boss at that time, a guy by the name of Stephen Sullivan, and some of you will remember him fondly. I'm still in touch with him. He's
Yeah.
one of my good friends. He's an incredible guy, and he did a world of good for my career because he was able to figure out how to make this entrepreneur more of a C-suite sort of executive. And
Right.
so I credit him for a lot of that. But he was about 8 months into my tenure, and I thought things were going swimmingly. We were making some progress. We were getting some comps going. Everybody's excited. He comes in from Paris. He says, "Look, I need to see you. I'm going to fly in on the way back to San Francisco. I'm going to fly in." And then, okay. So I figured, okay,
something's going on.
So Stephen would always give you feedback outdoors with a cigarette and a coffee, Starbucks.
I love it.
So we went outside, of course, and we walked around Yorkville. Our offices were at Bay and Bloor, obviously.
Yeah.
And so we walk around Yorkville, gets a Starbucks, and we're sitting on Cumberland. I remember this. He's got a cigarette in his hand. He says, "Look," he says, "you're doing a great job, but you're driving everybody crazy. Okay? You're driving everybody crazy because you're in their kitchen. You're on top of them all the time. I said, that's your natural bent because that's where you're coming from. That's where you're coming." He says, "It's not your name on the door. It's Gap. You have to remember that." And I had no idea. I had no idea. And that wasn't my intent, and that wasn't my natural style. My style is to delegate, hire well, delegate and trust, etc. And it wasn't happening. So I did 2 things. I met with everybody individually, and I did a mea culpa. I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "This is not my intent. This is the feedback I received. What do you need from me to make it work?" That's number 1. Number 2 is I went on a couple of leadership retreats, independent. So I paid for it myself. And there were a couple of great leadership retreats that were sort of co-designed by Warren Bennis, who's a famous Stanford professor emeritus of leadership. They were very powerful. And one of the epiphanies, they did a skit right before the conference started. They did a skit with a bunch of actors about leadership traits that need working on. And
Okay.
you see yourself in this situation. And there was one where somebody came into somebody's office and said, "Hey, I really need to talk to you about something." They closed the door. They said, "Sure." So the guy behind the woman or man, I don't remember, behind the desk said, "Sure, I'm all ears." Meanwhile, the person sits down. You can tell that she's a little nervous. And so they start to talk, and he's busy on his email and looking at this, that, and
which is a lot of people listening to this is probably going, "Oh man, I do that."
And so okay. And so when the person left the office, they felt totally unfulfilled because they didn't think they were heard at all.
Right.
Even though they might have been, and even though he could maybe do 2 things at once, it wasn't an engaging conversation, and they felt unfulfilled. So one of the things that I learned was you have to be present in the moment, and you have to listen really carefully. And that's a skill that has to be learned. So one of the things that I would put out there for everybody is, especially in retail, especially when you're dealing with staff, especially when you're dealing with customers, especially when you're dealing with vendors, listen. Just stop talking and listen. And
listening's such a hard skill for people, right?
Yes.
I teach leaders this all the time, be present. And I actually say now, listen to learn, because
Yes.
if you're listening to learn, you're more curious about somebody. Because when you're reading a book, or you're watching, or you're in a conference, you're in that learning mindset, right? So you're listening to learn. So I've been teaching a lot from the book. I've just been saying, listen to learn when you're talking to people, because it puts the focus on them, not on us. So that's a great lesson that you learned.
So 2 comments on that. Number 1 is there were some consultants that we used when the 3 of us were running the international division when we didn't have a president. We had a consultant come in and help sort of facilitate the decision making amongst the 3 of us.
Okay.
And they had a cool scale of a listening scale, a -2 and a +2.
Hmm.
And the -2 was you're not listening at all. You're just trying to think of what next point or next question you're going to ask or tell or talk about. Versus +2 is listening to be altered. Now think about that. Listening to be altered. If you're that open and you're that good a listener, you're actually listening, just like you said, listening to learn, but listening to alter your point of view or alter your perception, or maybe you're going to learn something new that may change the way you look at something or the context or whatever the case may be. And so that's where the scale goes from -2 to +2. And so you always have to move everybody towards the +2 because that's when you're going to get the magic that happens. The second thing I'll say is that I was lucky to be part of the leadership development program, the LDP at Gap. And I was part of the second group. So they were sort of guinea pigs still. And what Gap did was an incredible thing. They brought us together once a quarter for a year. Same group. And they created a model where what they did was they brought in these incredibly high-powered speakers to talk about different leadership models. So they weren't prescribing one for everybody to use. They were, what they were doing was they were making sure that we had awareness of all of them, and we needed to choose one that fit us, that fit our personality. And so the one message that I got out of that, and I still use it today, is, and it's paraphrasing what you said, listen, learn, teach.
Yeah, I read that on your LinkedIn profile. So explain that to us, because I think, because this is an amazing conversation, by the way. I'm like taking notes on my phone right here.
So this is, to me, that's what leaders need to do. Okay. That's the job of us. We need to be the supreme listener, because you don't know when the next great idea is going to come about. You don't know when the next solution, because most of the solutions in an organization are there somewhere. They don't necessarily reside with a CEO or COO or any C-suite. They're out there. They could be a sales associate in one of the stores. It could be a district manager that's figured out something. So you've got to be able to listen and make sure that you do that. And there's a reason why we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah, Dean just wrote that in the chat, actually.
We're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak, at least. So the important part about listening is that you learn something, to your point. If you've got to be open enough to learn and say, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. And that's something that people need to admit to. Some people don't, and especially some CEOs don't. But I didn't know that, and let's explore that, and let's learn from that. And then what you need to do is go and teach. So not only are you teaching what you learned, but you're also teaching other leaders to become effective leaders and developing other leaders to be better than you are, so that they can take on the challenges next and create that succession and create that harmony and create that next plan. So that's in a nutshell what listen. It's very simple, but it's something that I really ascribe to, and I really try to develop that.
Well, because so I'm hearing so much out of what you've just shared, and especially like you said about teaching leaders to be better leaders, right? Like, do you believe that our role as a leader is to pipeline other leaders, or do you believe like a leader's job is to grow themselves? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, look, I think by developing other leaders and by listening and learning, you're going to develop yourself automatically, because you're going to learn from other leaders. If you let them lead and you let them create, they can make mistakes. They can, they can create some great successes, etc. But that's part of the journey that you're on. We're all on a journey, and we're all on a journey until we're not on the journey anymore.
Yeah.
And we're learning every day. And so if you're naturally curious and you want to learn every day, sky's the limit from a leadership standpoint. It really is. And you can be most effective. I've always said that the secret weapon of any organization is their people, and how they're organized, how they're engaged, how they're appreciated, and how they're rewarded. And so those are the things that make it. It's very simple, and that's even
it's simple, but people make it so complicated, right?
They get in their own way. And Peter Drucker was the one. in the 20s and 30s and 40s that figured this out way back then. I mean,
Yeah.
he said, treat your employees as volunteers. Very
Right.
simple. So if you have that mindset, your employee experience is going to be great. Your engagement is going to be great. You're going to find great solutions because you're listening and learning from them. And so it's just a virtuous. You want to create that virtuous cycle.
Yeah. A lot of people that are watching, obviously, this show every week, or in my network, your network, are people that are experienced retail leaders, but also leaders that want to grow and thinking about a career in retail. Like you said, back in the day, retail wasn't this career that you really chose to go into.
Right.
But now that's changing because it's the third highest employment sector in the world. What do you love about retail? Because you said you walked into the store and your wife was like, just do me a favor, go back and work in retail. What do you love about retail? Because I love asking people this because I'm a promoter of having a career in retail because I've had a great one. So
right.
What do you love about retail as a career?
There's a couple things. Number one is you get immediate feedback. And we talked about this beforehand. You get to know exactly how you're doing by the minute if you want. I mean, and so that's very valuable, and you can sort of turn on a dime and you can change and you can adjust and you can. The second thing is it's a very because it's the ultimate direct to consumer, you get a direct interaction with the consumer. And so you're able to figure out what they're doing, how they're doing, and you have to take cues from them. And if you're smart, you can pick up their cues just at the right time and provide them what they need, when they need it, how they need it. And so I think that's an incredible thing. The third thing I would say is even as a store manager or district manager, you've got to pull in all kinds of different functions, and you've got to be a real general manager. I've been a general manager since I graduated from college. So I didn't come up with one function or another, which, can make me a bit of a square peg in a round hole. But I loved it because I love the diversity of the different functions.
Yeah.
I love the ability to be able to, to move from one function to the next, have a finance meeting, and then a marketing meeting, a merchandising meeting, a design meeting, and an HR meeting, and all that kind of stuff. So I love the diversity of that. And as retail, you get to understand what it means to be a general manager. And so I think that those are some of the aspects of retail that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I love that you said that. There's so many different aspects, and I love that you can make and pave a really great career. Look at you. You owned a brand, you sold it, and then look at where you what you took your career and your roles. It's like you can pave your way. There's not, and I like that you said a square peg in a round hole, because there isn't one path in retail. And that's what I love about it. It's so diverse. Every day is so different, and you can make it what it is, right?
And I will say something else. With what this COVID thing has taught us is the value of remote leadership and remote management. And retailers have understood that for decades, because we've had stores 3,000 miles away that we've been responsible for, and we've had to make sure that they're involved, that they're engaged, that they understand, that they feel part of the whole, that they're connected. And so we know how to do that. So it isn't a foreign concept to us at all around remote working and remote leadership and remote communication. So
I love
that's an added bonus.
I love that you said that, because I was having a conversation with a leader last year that was struggling because they were all out of the office. And I was like, I managed 3,000 people that were across the country. This is not foreign. I knew how to hold engaging conference calls, right? How to do a remote store visit, hold people accountable, or inspire people remotely. Yeah, we have been doing it. And I think this is such a skill that we have that can be, tapped into in other industries as well. And that's why we created the course on Retail U, Remote Leadership for District Managers, because it teaches everybody all of that, which is awesome. Yeah, so this is such a great conversation. Oh my God, you've shared so many golden nuggets of your words of wisdom. And it's 9:20. It's 25 minutes in. We've got 5 minutes left. I know. I'm like, it always goes so fast. I could stay here for another half an hour.
Keep going.
So I'm trying, because you've answered a lot of my questions actually that I was going to ask you.
Let me give you a couple of quotations that also are meaningful to me, and hopefully they'll be meaningful to the people out there, and we'll make some comments on them. So John Hanley, who was a guy who owned some company called LifeSpring back in the 80s or 90s, said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so as leaders, you have to be engaged with them and be empathetic. And that's the whole EQ thing. But it's more than that. You have to show that they know that you care. You may care on an intellectual level and you may care on an emotional level. But if you don't show that, they have no idea. So you have to show your vulnerability. You have to be humble. You have to admit when you.
How do you do that though, Lloyd? Because like we hear that a lot being talked about and a lot being said, but like, what does that actually look like?
It's being true to yourself. It's being authentic. So it's really being, real. So there's no false pretense. You know what? If you swear once in a while, then you swear once in a while. That, it's just that's just part of the thing. If you're emotional or you have a tear in your eye or there's an upsetting conversation or whatever, you show it. Like it's not, you're not robots. This isn't robot.
Right.
People don't relate to robots. They relate to human beings, and we're all human beings. We all have feelings. We all have jobs to do, yes, and we all have to make difficult decisions. That doesn't mean you can't show that it's a difficult decision. That doesn't mean you can't show some emotion when things are tough, and you can't. And also, you can admit when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things out there. And the second quotation follows up with that. People with humility don't think less of themselves. They think of themselves less. And
I love that.
It's Norman Vincent Peale, right? So famous poet, author, extraordinaire, American. And so it really is about being humble enough to be open to feedback, being open to new learning and listening and understanding how authentic you are. It takes a little work to show your authentic self.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that leaders generally, that's sort of the last thing that comes.
I think it comes with like time and experience. And once somebody asked me a question the other day, like, and I love asking this question, like, what do you wish you knew back then that you know now? And for me, it was just to be myself, like wholeheartedly, because the more I grew into being more comfortable with myself, the better leader I became, the better talent I attracted because they appreciated it, right? So it's funny because we all take on, when you go back to the beginning, like say if there's a store manager and they're becoming a DM and you take on this title and then you think you have to act a certain way because of this title, but actually that does you a disservice. You shared that story at the beginning, right?
That's correct. So I'll leave you with two thoughts around that. Number one is being humble does not make you any less confident, okay? And it doesn't make you any less decisive either. Like they're not connected. They're disconnected. You can still be humble and be very decisive and clear in your communications. And you can also be very confident in what you're doing and how you're going about it. But, you can still be humble in the same way. So that's sort of my
Oh, it's brilliant. Oh, it's such a good conversation. Oh,
thanks for the opportunity. April, it was great to be with you, and continued success, and keep up the great work. You're doing great things.
Well, thank you. So if you find this in your feed, you're on LinkedIn or you're on our Facebook page and you find this in your feed, this was an amazing conversation with Lloyd Perlmutter, who's had a positive effect on the businesses and the people he's led. So share it with your retail network, share it with your community, because we bring this conversation to life every week so that we can learn from amazing leaders that have done the job, and had successes, and that we can all grow from. So I just really appreciate you, Lloyd, taking the time out of your day and joining us, and wish you the best of luck in your future.
Thank you very much, April.
All right. Speak to you soon. Bye, everybody.